Hey, everybody, welcome back. I'm Susan Linder, your host of the Innovation Storytellers Show. And today we're going to take a little walk, maybe down a road that you do not get to think about or take very often, but we're talking about innovation in healthcare. And as we start off at the top of the year, healthcare is certainly top of the news. And we're all thinking about our New Year's resolutions, making ourselves healthier, thinking about our loved ones who are going through tough times around their own health and their own health journeys. And that's why I think it's so important that we talk about this topic on the regular. And it's not just what's happening from a clinical perspective, but what's also happening in healthcare business, because all of it impacts us. And that's why I'm really excited to have Tina Posey here with me today. She is the CEO of HealthcarePoint, and she has had leadership roles with Fortune 500 companies just like yours, as well as key roles within startups for my entrepreneurs out there. Her role expertise spans everything from executive leadership to strategy, product development, operationalization, program management, and even P&L expertise into the millions and millions of dollars. She has managed teams of more than 50 people here in the US and abroad, and she really understands operational scaling, which we're going to get into. Her goal is to drive HealthcarePoint through innovation through the intersection of doing well by doing good. And innovation, optimization, digital health, and wellness are her watchwords and her passion, like so many of ours. She's originally from Tennessee, but she has worked in 6 different countries, including England, France, Korea, Singapore, and Australia. Not to mention, she is a lifelong learner, and she's back at school at Harvard studying public health policy and health policy. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Susan.
I'm,
Pleasure
I'm,
to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. So let's talk a little bit about how you got into innovation and especially around healthcare. What was your journey of making this move?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So basically, I got into the healthcare space just after 2020 with COVID. Everyone's thinking healthcare, and I
Mm,
became super fascinated. I was always fascinated about social good and innovation, but the healthcare part of it really struck as I was seeing all the sickness going on around us, and it led me to Healthcare Point. And I find that my calling really is sort of innovation seeker, if you will. But a bit about Healthcare Point, just to give everyone a frame of reference.
sure.
We work with all the major pharma companies, as well as medical device and medical innovators for our medical technology platform, which basically enables them to share competency data for their healthcare providers, like the doctors and nurses who are working in specific trials. So it's the ability for them to share that data with each other to ensure both regulatory and safety requirements to ensure that everyone is qualified to be on a specific trial. So I landed here and I'm excited about moving it forward.
That's fantastic. And I spent 10 years in public health right out of college. And my last gig was supposed to be working with clinical trials in the public health sector, specifically around HIV and AIDS. And back in the late 90s, that was really the place to be. There was so much cutting edge research going on, and patients for whom clinical trials were life or death. It's not a small thing to try to optimize a clinical trial, knowing just how critical that research and those potential breakthroughs can be. It's such an exciting part of the healthcare spectrum to be a part of.
Yeah, agreed. And equally, it's important that folks are, qualified to run those trials and to ensure that, they're reaching all through all those phases as well. So
Yeah. And not an easy task, right? Because there's so many moving parts to a clinical trial. There's so much regulatory issues. And I know a lot of my listeners, they're constantly dealing with regulatory issues from the government and so forth. But we have to be really mindful when we're dealing with patients' lives.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So I know you're at the cutting edge. So tell us some of the trends that you're seeing in this first and second wave of healthcare at the moment, and also what you're seeing by way of private equity investment.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'm seeing basically in terms of innovation, what I term first and second wave. Really, first wave I consider is early innovation, which for us, innovation is doubling and tripling year by year. So only a few years ago would be what I'm talking about in terms of early innovation from the perspective of data and the use of data. And now, of course, with the emergence of AI and generative AI, it's become an even faster ride for innovation acceleration. So, early innovation, that first wave, things like online consultation with patients, that was what COVID, we did telemedicine, 3D printing was starting for different medical devices and parts of medical devices, a lot of automation, automating insulin delivery, which was a major breakthrough. So a lot to do with, remote and remote work, which became the state of things of the present day, right? But now, in terms of adding generative AI to the mix, that further accelerates things by leaps and bounds. And some amazing trends are coming from that. Everything from, as we see, you can see tons of different operational and administrative accelerations happening, but also just in terms of the use of data and AI use of data to quicken a response to potential issue, at home tests that were never before possible because of the data. So there, we'll talk a little more, and I've got some examples to share, but it's pretty amazing what's coming, and we're just getting started. But then what's interesting when I look at the market and what's happening, I always try to get a sense and a pulse of what the private equity firms are doing, because from that, you could really see what they term is something that could be standardized, for example, in the future. Um, Private equity firms tend to invest in pretty stable, I would say more conservative in the last few years because of the up and down of the private equity industry. So I'm seeing a lot of investment in sort of administrative, operational, and or huge advances in AI. For example, there was one organization, and I couldn't believe the amount of the funding called R1 RCM, which basically is a revenue cycle management company. So, not an innovation per se, but more of an optimization of revenue cycles. Because the way hospitals operate, there were quite a number of inefficiencies within health systems.
Hmm.
So, my thought on that, the investment I think was like 8.3 billion, not million, billion. So apparently operationalization and accelerating processes is a big gap in what's happening in healthcare today.
Mm. So we always talk about all the different flavors of innovation on the show. And certainly you can introduce a new product. That's exciting. You can inject new technologies like AI into a problem, right? To look at bigger data sets, to rapidly review X-ray and CT films, but the other is business model shift. And it's like the most discounted form of, and it's the most treacherous, it's the most perilous form of innovation. But you think about going from a transaction model to a monthly SaaS model, it's been one of the biggest breakthroughs for technology and software industry in the software industry's history, is just how we bill for it. And then by and large, how we service customers monthly, how we think about recommending what's next, right? Or constantly creating product upgrades before the customer even has a chance to ask for it, right? This is the business model shift is sometimes, and to this point, creating new profitability models like can have the biggest impact on our health as well as the business of health.
Yes, yes, and that streamline of processes also can accelerate or drastically reduce time to diagnosis or time to treating all those siloed departments from intake to the processing the patient through the hospital, for example, reducing the time it takes to get to that diagnosis, for example, or getting them into a room. So yes, I would have to agree with you. It can be a real game changer.
For sure, for sure. So as you're looking at this, right? I mean, you get to zoom out as opposed to an entrepreneur who's like working in the minutia. So, what are you seeing are some of the trends among disease entities? Like, what are you following?
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I'm looking at mega trends first, macro trends, and then sort of diving deeper when I look to determine who's a good fit for our platform and who do we want to build awareness for our product with. And so one of the things I like to do is not only looking at what the PE firms are doing, but more importantly, what are the diseases that have the biggest impact today? What are the largest percentage of population are affected by? And heart disease, stroke, lower respiratory infection, COPD, those are and Alzheimer's, those are like maybe the top five, right? So looking in those areas for innovation that might help fill a gap or a need. That's kind of the track I go down in terms of looking to see what innovation might be interesting.
Mm. So, I mean, those are some serious ones. So that means you're
Yeah.
actively looking for clinical trials around those as well, or how does that
Yes.
match together?
Yes, exactly. Our platform, we're trial agnostic. We can work with any type of trial on the market. However, we do have a focus on cardio, CNS, and neuro. Just it's just sort of how it happened. And luckily, heart disease and stroke being the top two, I feel like we're covering a large part of the market today.
And it's certainly where most of us resonate, right? When we know people who have these illnesses and where they really need support.
Yes, and then second to that also, I might mention, Susan, is just understanding what gaps are today in the healthcare arena. And as we just brought up, this idea of building efficiencies into hospital system processes, that administrative bloat from processes or siloed processes. There's always the regulation and higher cost to factor in. And then I think also with the coming of big data and data, it's already here, and data security and just complexity of the data. Those are all kind of gaps and challenges that as an industry,
Mhm.
healthcare needs to deal with. So,
So true. Um, I'm curious because like we've talked a little bit about AI and business process that might shift and business models and creating more profitability. But we know that there are opportunities in the market when we see gaps in the healthcare industry. Can you talk a little bit about where you see the gaps and the opportunity?
yeah, yeah, and I mean, in terms of gaps that I kind of alluded to moments ago, the idea of reduced cost of types of issues within a hospital environment, for example. I'm seeing a lot of innovation around reducing the time to getting a result or getting a test result, for example. AI helping to build in decision processes and decision support quicker
Okay.
is a big area of, I guess, opportunity, and it's also being filled. I'm seeing a lot of good companies come on the market related to that. Like one, and I can just cite one quick example of an organization called Ignite, and they basically have AI technology that would help identify patients for the risk of stroke, heart failure, and valve disease. So that is sort of a predetermination before the person has to go through the whole thing of an emergency visit and all the things that go into that, all the tests that go into that. Being able to assess that further in the future prior to that actually happening is like game changing. So
Mm. So these gaps, are you seeing it also like if we look at across the innovation spectrum, where do you think the the greatest opportunities that data might be able to play a role in shifting that?
yeah.
Because
And I
we're
think that
all overwhelmed, yeah, by the amount of data
yes.
we have at our disposal. It feels like a bowl of rotting fruit to me. Like so much data and like we're collecting so much data and like do we even really know what to do with it?
Yeah, and there's so many areas that data has helped and that data will continue to help in terms of, as I said, just decision support, but
Mm.
also the predeterminate has become a big area of opportunity, and it is being there are lots of companies coming on the market with tests that can help predetermine certain illnesses, for example, and having that predetermination could lead to potentially there needs to be some behavior change that goes in with that, right? The patients need to be able to change their behavior, but say they actually could, then that predetermination saves them lots of time, lots of effort, and may avoid hospital visits. So,
Wouldn't that be amazing?
yeah, yes, quite amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm also seeing it from the doctor's perspective, right? I have friends who are skilled radiologists who are watching AI detect things that they could never detect. Right? They're uncovering after looking at uploading, right? Thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of scans, that the sensitivity level is that which a human can't even reach. When you think about where the gaps are the humans the gaps? Or are we very quickly trying to figure out how to uplevel ourselves in order to compete with the machines effectively?
Yes, I that's such a great question, and I think that's still to be determined, and we're all sort of grappling with that question, aren't we? At what point using the technology for our own benefit? But yeah, I great question.
What do you think? I mean, like if we look ahead 10 years from now, what's going to be happening in a med school about teaching a radiologist to read a film?
Yes, and I mean, will there be radiologists at that point? Or would it be a function of an AI bot or an application, for example? Will that even be taught? Not to scare anyone, or I don't know the future any more than anyone else does. However, potentially it changes the structure of that role when maybe there's one radiologist director that might work an entire equivalent to 20 radiologists.
Yeah, I think one of the things that AI hasn't been able to figure out yet, especially in this particular space, is what to do with it. Okay, great. We found a cancer, a tumor, a something at this juncture.
Hmm.
Do we operate? Do we leave it alone? Do we watch it? You know, that right now it's the slightest detection of cancer means chemotherapy, radiation, a whole host of treatments, right?
Yep.
Sometimes we don't even know if we're getting in too early, too aggressively, so that we might be able to determine whether or not that a patient's life doesn't have to be disrupted necessarily at that stage, right? Or that other treatments can be created to that don't involve the most horrific, the most challenging, I'll say,
Yes.
parts of treatment that we never experienced before because we were so fixated on finding the thing that our opportunities, our priorities will just shift. Great. Now we can leave it to the robots to find the stuff. Now let's figure out how to fix it faster.
Yes, and more less invasive treatments, so focusing on the correct things from that point. Yeah,
Right.
great point.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yes. Yes.
So you're on the other side of the storytelling table, whereas most of us as innovators are having to come up with pitches and ideas and stories in order to get the CEO, the CFO, or other folks on board with the big idea. You're getting pitched the ideas.
Yes, I'm getting pitched the idea, and in terms of how I analyze and prioritize what might work for us or what we bring to the platform versus what we wouldn't, I kind of go through a mental checklist from, as I said, the macro view down to the micro view from, I guess, a needs basis. So I'm focused on those top diseases. I'm also focused on what's the SROI, which is the social value back. Not only from a profitability standpoint, we are a business, but we're also focused and very focused on what's the benefit and can we what's the maximum benefit we could offer the market. So those are two really important criteria for us. And the other thing I think is understanding that really when we look at the world, we're in 193 countries today. And when we're looking at opportunities, it's not necessarily the same in the US as it is in, say, Africa, for example. You know, there are different challenges, different opportunities, different regulatory, different environments. People need different things. So looking at the opportunities we bring on board is really looking at it from the perspective of what market is it in and what's the maximum number of people we can help with that technology, for example.
Right. And I love the internationalization of this discussion because the stories that you're getting pitched across cultures are so different, right?
Yes, and in places like Africa, for example, they've been using trials as a care option for years. In the US, not so much, right? And there are so many needs that the African population have that we don't see in the US as much. And we have today a very strong link with Africa in terms of patient populations. What we're seeing and what we saw over the last couple of years, unrelated to innovation, but still very relevant, is diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we
Mm.
all just started hearing about a few years ago, right? But now with the FDA mandating that within clinical trials, it it's building in a whole new profile of patient, which we're welcoming with open arms, right? We knew for a long time that a lot of patients weren't getting that trial care in the US, and the US is a primary market for clinical trials anyway. So the fact that some demographics and populations were being left out of clinical trials just didn't seem correct. So it's opened up, and that's the great news. And we have very large populations who are using clinical trials as a care option. And so I think those two things together for us is going to bring a lot of help to a lot of people who need it, which is amazing.
Yeah, and I know we use the term care option, but I mean, there are so few, having worked in so many developing countries like you have. It's like it's the clinical trial or take two aspirin, right? It's the clinical trial or and walk 15 miles to get it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not a small thing. And I heard this fantastic researcher talking about the gender disparity in clinical trials. And she was saying, of course, there's gender disparity in clinical trials. Everybody knows this is not anything new. She said, but the majority of people think that the reason for that is because old white guys were running the clinical trials. And she goes, that's part of it. She goes, but let's step out for a moment. She said, first off, the competitive landscape for clinical trials is rough because there's a limited amount of funds and we're all diving into it. She said, so step one, just note it's a very competitive landscape. It's not like
Mhm.
there's bags of money waiting for each of us, right? And we're all just opting to not focus on women in clinical trials. The next thing she said is what clinical trials funders want is rapid results so that it can inform the pharmaceutical care or service provision based on those outcomes. So you're like, cool, okay, we want to get answers to the data really quickly. Now, if I want to study men, they have basically the same hormonal distribution over the course of months and years, pretty much from 18 to 65. That frequency is pretty much stable.
Mhm.
Women during the same age category are premenstrual, menstrual, pregnant, postnatal, menopausal, perimenopausal. Like, and even in the course of 1 month, women's lives change so much hormonally and otherwise. And so just trying to get data on an accurate data source is no easy stretch. So is the faster, and I think this is another place where AI can help us, the faster that
Mm.
AI can teach us ways to identify cohorts, really quickly get in to figuring out how will we normalize for all these fluctuations in a woman's life, because we're beautifully complex organisms, is the way that we can get more data, better data faster and capitalize on some of those clinical trials funding opportunities too.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And yes, just another way AI may be able to help us with that. But that data normalization, another complexity, if handled well, will go beautifully. So great
Fingers
point.
crossed. Yeah. It's such a fascinating discussion. It's like it's so rich for really cementing the storytelling side of it, because I'm sure all different kinds of organizations come to you and say, help us, right? Let us be part of the groups. Let us get in. What are some of the stories, Tina, that have really stuck with you over the years of organizations that want to work with you?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of examples to share. I did mention the Ignite
Mhm.
organization and just the idea about identifying patients with risk of stroke, heart failure, and heart disease as predetermined detection. They actually are, and I think we're both sort of near New Jersey. They're in the New Jersey area. And what was interesting about their platform, well, they won some awards for one. And then secondly, they have really good use cases where they've proved out their technology and also offered core clear data on efficiencies, on time to mark. So there were many metrics and criteria that they could show in terms of how they've improved over what's happening prior to them being on the market. So I really value that. And I think what's key is looking at those solutions that focus on the top disease areas that will help fill that gap. So I think that's one use case that I found super interesting. The fact that they have won several awards in disruptive technology, and also the fact that they had great use cases and lots of data behind what they offer. Another that I found that I thought was super interesting, called Viz AI. And Viz AI basically helps in terms of stroke care and stroke care coordination. So the goal of the product is to quickly remediate and or give that care coordination in an accelerated way, because the quicker you can help someone who's going through a stroke, for example, seconds count, right? So
Right.
every second, and in their case, I think they proved out with their model 45-minute savings from door to what they would call revascularization, which would be kind of like from door to remediation. The patient was resting and everything was okay. And then
Yeah.
a 42-minute savings on imaging. And that goes back to sort of your AI and imaging example. But, that acceleration in really critical scenarios is really super important. So I find those are game changers in my book.
Yeah. And pretty compelling, right? I mean, gosh,
Yeah.
the difference of 45 minutes in a stroke patient can be the difference of movement of speech, right? I mean, that's not a small thing
Yes.
at all. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Very
So
powerful.
amazing. And then another thing I found on the market that really woke me up to the idea that drugs will get introduced into the market for specific scenarios, but there have been times when a specific drug is introduced on the market, but then it might be proven that it could actually work for something else. And in the case of, there was a Canadian drug, hopefully I'm saying this correctly, but axitinib, and basically, it was introduced on the market for, I think it was like cancer, but then it helped with stroke as well. Like the ability of testing, continuing to test a drug that you introduced to the market for one core issue, to then understand that it would actually work for something else as well, is amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, that
So
is one of the benefits, right? I think I think we've been jaded. We think sometimes that companies are inventing ailments for us to match their pharmaceutical products. But it's really wonderful when we actually find multiple uses for a single drug that we had no idea was available to us.
yeah, yeah. So agree, so agree. And and another one I just wanted to bring up because I think it's so compelling, and I always support our youth and medical and scientific discovery. And there was one case, there's a, I guess, an initiative or a challenge for kids to introduce innovation and healthcare innovation. And this young gentleman named Haman Bekele, and what he found was he wanted to make a difference in Africa related to skin cancer.
Mm,
And so the simplification of it was basically what he brought to market and what he invented was a soap that would help with skin cancer.
mm,
To me, it's mind-boggling. He's a young gentleman, probably, I don't know, 14, 15 years old, and basically began working with soap to test the soap. It treats melanoma, and he had to develop it so that there was a certain percentage of the various parts that would help from salicylic acid to glycolic acid to trinon, and ensure that those, I guess, the makeup of the soap would actually help with a melanoma. And so he won an award for that initiative. I think that came out last year. I'm not sure if he's operationalizing it yet, but basically he found that in sub-Saharan Africa, only 20% of carcinoma victims have a result that they can get through the cancer, but it's 80% in the US. So I wanted to come up with a solution that was cost effective in a market, and a simple solution that could help so many. So
Right.
love
Wow.
that idea.
Me too. Me too. Well, we're coming to the end of our conversation where I ask all of my guests these three hot seat questions. Are you ready?
Oh, sure.
Okay. What do you think is the greatest innovation of all time?
The greatest innovation of all time. Well, it wouldn't necessarily be in the healthcare space, although that's my space for now. But I would say the internet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You would
I
have
mean,
many
printing press will
people.
be the first, but we're past that. So
And what do you, if you had the opportunity to join an innovation team throughout the course of human history, which innovation team would you have liked to have joined?
wow. Throughout the course of history, I think now is the time to join an innovation team related to AI and the fast strides that we're going to make, but also to help police the strides because we have to have ethical AI.
Yes, absolutely. And finally, what's something that really annoys you or something that you wish were in the world today to make everybody's life better? What would you love to see innovated that is not?
What would I love to see innovated that is not? I think it's coming. Just the day-to-day processes that take longer than they should. But the danger is leaving out the human element. I think we always have to be mindful that human connection is a lovely part of being in this world. But the annoying part can be sometimes the daily processes, customer service calls or others can be enhanced and improved.
I don't know. Every day I think about the answer to this question, and it depends where I am in the moment. Most recently, it's like boarding an airplane. Can we figure this part out? Can we just get people in the right groups boarded? Can we just board from the back of the airplane and just move up to the front, first class, hang out, relax on the lounge a little longer? Like, I don't know
Yeah.
what it is, but like, I have a pet peeve a week. So happy to, happy to share. Tina, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yes, the best way through our website, www.healthcarepoint.com. Contact us and be happy to respond to any queries, give more information for any of the stories that I told today.
Fantastic. Tina Posey, CEO of HealthcarePoint, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Susan.